All right, let's go back to where we left off in the introduction, and then we'll just spend a few minutes on this, and then we'll start looking at the hymns. I don't know how far we'll get through today. A lot of that will depend on questions you have, or if there are specific passages you want to discuss that I don't have marked, because I have several. Wait, I've read all those. Why don't I have any of them marked? I've got several in the first 5 or so that I don't have anything marked. Just indicating that there's not anything I especially want to discuss in those hymns or in those stanzas. Okay? So back to page 72, where your editor, Brock, writes, the ultimate aim of the incarnation, however, was not just to restore Adam's humanity to paradise, that is, to keep him in paradise, but to raise humanity to the position of honor that Adam and Eve would have been granted had they kept the divine commandment, as St. Ephrem explains in the commentary on Genesis 2:23. Had the serpent been rejected along with the sin, they would have eaten of the tree of life, and the tree of knowledge would not have been withheld from them any longer. In other words, they would have, if they had not eaten from the tree of knowledge, they would have been allowed to eat both of the tree of life and of the tree of knowledge. The idea wasn't that the prohibition against the tree of knowledge was some kind of perpetual prohibition. It was a temporary thing. Okay? From the one, they would have acquired infallible knowledge, and from the other, they would have received immortal life. They would have acquired divinity in humanity.
It's like with Paralandra when
yeah,
the prohibition is against sleeping
exactly.
in the mainland.
Exactly. In fact, that was something I was going to discuss in a minute. That's fine. And had they thus acquired infallible knowledge and immortal life, they would have done so in this body. That is, their physical humanity would have been transformed. Okay? What the fathers will talk about, what they'll write about, is that when Moses says man was created in the image and likeness of God, these aren't synonymous. Okay? Image was made with rationality, with the soul, okay, and choice. Okay. This, however, is what humanity would have grown into had they never sinned. Had Adam and Eve never sinned, they would have grown more and more and more like God, which is what Brock is talking about there about divinization. He goes on and he quotes from the Nisibene hymns, the Most High knew that Adam wanted to become a god. What did the serpent say? Know you not that you shall be like God? Okay. So he, God, sent his son to put him on in order to grant him his desire. The Most High knew that Adam wanted to become a god, so he sent his son who put him on. What does it mean, who put him on? He put on Adam. What does the word Adam mean?
Man. So.
Okay. More literally.
Mankind or
no.
Body.
Son of earth. Means of the earth. So he put him on. He put on a son of earth. He took on a human form. What? In order to grant him, go back to Adam. And what is meant by that? Man. To grant man's desire. Okay, and then he quotes from the hymns on virginity. And then writes this. It has sometimes been said that the concept of the divinization or theosis of humanity is something that crept into Christianity, and especially Eastern Christianity, under Hellenic influence. That is, this is an idea that came from the Greeks, and that came from Greek philosophy. Can't be, though. Okay? clear, however, that Ephrem, whom Theodoret described, Theodoret's a slightly later writer, whom Theodoret described as unacquainted with the language of the Greeks. Theodoret was a writer of Antioch and a little bit Mopsuestia, which is east of Antioch. And Theodore lived after Ephrem. He says if Ephrem was almost thoroughly unfamiliar with the Greeks, he probably didn't know Greek. Okay? And there weren't a lot of Greek materials translated into Syriac. Ephrem's material was translated from Syriac into Greek. For example, St. Jerome, the guy who authored the Vulgate Bible, translated the Vulgate Bible, read Ephrem in Greek, okay, after Ephrem's death, which tells you something about how important Ephrem was as a writer in the Eastern Christian part of the world. So, back to where we were. Theodoret described Ephrem as unacquainted with the language of the Greeks, and that is Ephrem's, are essentially Semitic and biblical in character, is nonetheless an important witness to this teaching. That is, the teaching about theosis. Moreover, in this context, it should be recalled that since the term son of, okay, implies belonging to the category of. So, what's the term that Matthew uses most often for Christ? Anybody know? Son of man. Okay? Son of man. Meaning in the category of humanity. Because Matthew is emphasizing Christ's humanity. John more often refers not to Christ as Son of God, but he emphasizes Christ's divinity. I mean, the whole thing about the Logos in the prologue to John's Gospel.
Now,
Go ahead.
when you're talking about the languages, what would Ephrem have read the Bible in?
Syriac.
Syriac, okay. So it would have been translated.
The Syriac translation of the Bible is one of the earliest translations of the Bible. And he discusses that translation earlier in the introduction. And he has a couple of footnotes somewhere in the first couple of hymns. He mentions the Peshitta, which is the Syriac translation of the Bible, if I remember correctly.
And this is all 3rd century, right? Or, sorry, 4th century.
4th century. Yep. So, hold on a second. So, he goes on. What did he say over here? Yeah, the term son of implies belonging to the category of. And the title children of God, to which Christians attain at baptism, okay, when they're baptized, that's the title given to them, would suggest, okay, to the Semitic mind. Keep in mind, we're talking about the Semitic mindset, which is not a Western Judeo-Christian mindset particularly, because our mindset has been more heavily influenced by the Greeks, okay? Which would suggest to the Christian mindset, or mind, that they had potentially the characteristics of divine beings. In other words, immortality. So children of God would imply being of the category of God, taking on God-like qualities and characteristics, but not God-like qualities and characteristics in the terms of just love, mercy, those kinds of things, but essentially, okay, through grace, okay? So, once again, the theological content of Ephrem's poetry is remarkably similar to that of his Greek contemporaries, but how he expresses it is different, because he doesn't express it using Greek metaphors, concepts, ideas. So that when you read Ephrem, when we read Ephrem, let's say, or I won't even say we, when I read Ephrem, okay, it often takes a while to kind of wrap your mind around something he's saying, and if after several minutes of trying to wrap my mind around something, I still don't get it, I just go on. Okay? It's pretty much sometimes the best we can do. Okay? So, just as St. Athanasius expressed this mystery, the mystery of theosis, epigrammatically, God became man so that man might become God, so too does Ephrem. He gave us divinity. We gave him humanity. Okay? And there's all kinds of passages throughout Scripture that talk about, people being the children of God, the sons of God. Know you not that you are partakers of the divine flesh, divine nature. Saint Peter says in 2 Peter. So that's this mentality. It's this early mentality that we see expressed in Ephrem. We'll see it expressed in earlier writers. Now, Gregor, did you have more?
If I did, I forgot.
Okay.
Oh, right. Oh, how many books of the New Testament would he have had? Would he have had access to the whole what we would call the New Testament?
He would have had access to what we would call today the canonical New Testament, the 27 books. Okay. He probably would have had access to more of the what are called apocrypha, too. For example, he may have had access to the Shepherd of Hermas, which was considered early, up until the 330s or so. It was considered by many to be part of the quote-unquote New Testament. Okay, the 27 books that we consider the New Testament aren't determined to be the final list until the mid 4th century. Right. St. Athanasius refers to those 27 books in a list, but even all the way up to his time, in the 16th century. Okay, Martin Luther did not think the book of James should be in the New Testament at all, for the simple reason that James emphasizes works as well as faith, and works because of Luther's problem, Augustinian theology, and the Augustinian habit, the monastic order that he was a part of. He had some real issues with works. Okay,
That's interesting because, of course, the concept of what we would consider original sin, was mainly developed by Augustine. Of course, that's very central to Luther and Calvin.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't mean to say that he disagreed or disliked Saint Augustine. Okay, I misspoke when I said Augustinian theology. I meant the Augustinian monastic habit and order, and how it developed out of Augustine's. Because what develops in the latter part of the Middle Ages, in some monastic orders, is the whole idea of self-flagellation, reproving oneself, mortifying the flesh. The story of Luther is he goes to his priest, he says confession, he walks out, he remembers another sin, he wants to go back, and he is celebrating the Eucharist at a Mass, and he stops right in the middle of it because he realizes he has an unconfessed sin. How can I celebrate this with this unconfessed sin? And that's what really causes him to break away from the church, to realize, to come to this realization, he thought, that it is impossible to confess all of one's sins because you can't remember all of them. Okay? And for Luther, what that meant is, well, if you can't remember all of them, then you can't really confess any of them. So let's just get rid of this whole notion of confession of sins. And it's all got to be by the grace of God. Okay? That notion is totally foreign to the writers we're talking about. I mean, these writers would all say, as James says, faith without works is dead. In other words, if you're faithful or if you have faith in God, it will result in positive behavioral changes. Well, what are those positive behavioral changes? Caring for those who are less well off.
No.
Feeding the poor,
surely,
all that kind of stuff.
Luther would, I haven't read Luther specifically. From what I understand, Lutheran theology has something very similar in that, but it emphasizes the faith part and then basically sees the works as a result of that, or as a...
Yes and no. Yes and no, because it emphasizes the faith part to the extent that the works part is merely only a result, rather than seeing that the works part can be the demonstration of faith. Okay? And we don't have the time to delve into that as much as maybe we would like to. Okay, so let's jump into the actual hymns on paradise. Now, like I said, I'm going to hit a couple of stanzas or talk about some passages and stanzas. If I skip over something you want to discuss, then just stop me or interrupt or whatever. The first hymn, the first stanza, I don't want to talk about the little brief introduction, but look at what he says at is it the close? Yeah, just about the close of the first stanza on the bottom of page 77. He's talking about Moses revealing this information, and he talks about the tale of creation, wherein is revealed the tale of the garden, the story of the garden, all right? Described by things visible, but glorious for what lies hidden. And he's telling us right there that the story of the garden is just that. It's a story. Okay? And as with any story, what must a story do? A story must describe. That is, a story must have surface level information, surface level details, but then you dig and scratch a little bit deeper and you start to see more and more and more that is inside the story. It's like, with a modern story, say a Harry Potter novel. Well, it's the surface level of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is Harry's got to save the Sorcerer's Stone. But then you start to look a little bit deeper and it's more than that, because there are issues of immortality in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. There are issues of transformation, and not merely lead into gold. There's spiritual transformation, okay? So you have to look beneath, as he puts it, for what lies hidden, okay? And this goes back to what we were talking about in the introduction about you have to have the eyes to see, okay? Or the eyes to perceive. So, he says, I took my stand halfway between awe and love. That is, as he was reading Genesis, his positional stance, he says, was between awe and love. Awe, just completely dumbfounded. Okay. But what does he mean by love? What does love tend to do? Let's say you fall in love with someone. Okay. What does that love tend to do to you towards that other person? Okay, blinds you. So is he saying halfway between awe and blindness? We use a word today that has chemical connotations or chemistry connotations to describe love. Attraction. So what does love do? It attracts you. It draws you towards it. So standing between awe and love, awe is just this mind-blowing, let's say, appreciation or wonder. But love is the thing that draws him to do what? To attempt to understand, which is what he's going to talk about in just a little bit. A yearning for paradise invited me to explore it, but awe at its majesty restrained me from my search. The yearning, that's the drawing of love. But awe just says, leave it alone. You cannot understand this. Or maybe even not that you cannot understand this, but you should just remain in awe. Okay? George MacDonald, in a, what was that essay on? In an essay, I think it was titled On the Fantastic Imagination. It's either the one on the Fantastic Imagination or it's another essay on the imagination, just titled The Imagination. writes about, essentially the two ways you can perceive a rainbow. Ways you can perceive a rainbow.
You could just look at it, perceive the colors, or you
And
think of it in terms of, that, I guess you can say, think of it in terms of its source and how a rainbow is created.
you can have a thundery, stormy day. The sun breaks through, and you see this beautiful, glorious rainbow, and you're just awestruck by it. That's one reaction. It's one perception. The other perception is, look at that. Look at how those little water droplets in the sky are refracting that white light and breaking it all out of the colors of the spectrum. So you can be filled with awe or wonder, or you can be a scientist and you can attempt to take apart, to understand. One of them is not necessarily right and one is wrong. They're merely two different rainbows. He is saying here, I wanted to understand two different approaches because awe can be a means of. Okay? So, I revered what lay hidden and meditated on what was revealed. Revered what lay hidden, that's kind of in awe. Okay? And meditated, thought about what was revealed. Because the aim of my search was to gain profit. He doesn't mean monetary profit. So what kind of profit? Profit? Possibly. Profit for his soul? Possibly. The aim of my silence. So notice we oppositions. Okay? The aim of my search, my research, let's say, was to gain profit, was to learn. The aim of my silence, to find succor. Well, give me a better word for succor, because we don't use that word. Shelter.
Comfort.
Solace. Possibly even healing. Okay? So the aim of my silence. Well, what's the silence? Awe. Was to receive comfort or solace or healing. Comfort or solace or healing in or what? The soul, the spirit. It's not comfort or healing or a wound on his arm. So it is something internal. Okay? So what does he say? I embarked on my search for paradise. All right? My tongue read the story's outward narrative. And notice this. He's implying my tongue read. Why? As we understand it, didn't really come into, I don't want to say come into existence, but didn't really make its big foray human experience until the early Middle Ages, like after 500 and following. Prior to that, when people read, okay, they read speaking aloud, even when they were Bibles. I've got a book in my office about the history of private reading if you want to borrow it. It's really boring. So my tongue.
Somebody write that book.
English professors. My tongue read the story's outward narrative while my intellect took wing and soared upward in awe as it perceived the splendor of paradise. So the tongue is doing what? The tongue on the literal words, the literal images, the trees, the animals, the ground, the grass, the ocean, etc. And while the tongue is reading, what's the mind doing? It's tripping out, man. It's going, this is totally awesome. And it is going deeper and deeper and deeper into the text. As it what? Perceived the splendor of paradise. Not indeed as it really is. Okay, so how does the mind perceive the splendor with a mind? It sees the words and it says, the words have got to be saying so much more than what the words. So it takes the words and applies it deeper. So that when it talks about, Adam walking with God in the cool of the day, It's not just the cool of the day. He doesn't go from cool to this frozen, Arctic. It thinks, well, what's the cool of the day like for me? And then extrapolates. Okay, now what would that be like in paradise? That would be like Murfreesboro. Last summer, I built a deck outside my house, a big sucker. In middle of July to about the 1st of August, when we had that really hot spell, I mean, I was outside every day for about 10 hours a day when it was 115 degrees. Okay, so the cool of the day is going from 115 degrees to 72 and overcast and maybe a slight drizzle. Just that. That's what he does. Okay? As it perceived the splendor of paradise, not indeed as it really is, because we can't not understand that, but insofar as humanity is granted to comprehend it. In other words, what we understand of the splendor of paradise is only a splinter of the splendor of paradise. Okay? But even that little, let's say 1% that we can comprehend, man, that's, okay, which tells you more now by 99 times, and the awe is even greater. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, so he says, with the eye of his mind he gazed upon paradise. Why with the eye of his mind? Or what does he mean by the eye of his mind? When we say, imagine, if you will, or look with your mind's eye. It's not only imagine, it's drop a thought. It's try to perceive in here where the vision isn't faulty. Okay? Only reason I wear these is if I don't, things get a little bit blurry. Unless you get farther and farther away and they get more blurry. Okay? So he says, to see with the mind's eye where you remove that blur. And what did he gaze upon paradise? And then he gives us all of these descriptions. The mountain, the flood, the foothills, etc. Okay? And we come to stanza 5. Not that the ascent to paradise is arduous because of its height. For those who inherit it experience no toil there. Well, who are they who inherit paradise?
Those who are Christians.
Okay. And you have to be dead.
Right.
Okay. But we're told that paradise is a high mountain. But he says it doesn't require any toil to ascend to the top. Why? Because those who ascend are already those who have died. Okay? Not everybody gets to the top, by the way, of paradise. You only get to the level that you earn according to your works, not according to your faith. Okay? Because your faith determines how much you work. So let that sink in a little bit, With its beauty, it joyfully urges on those who ascend. Why? Because they want to experience more and more and more. Okay?
Further up and further in.
Yeah, exactly. Further up and further in. Amidst glorious rays, it lies resplendent. Well, what are the glorious rays from? It's not the sun.
The Lord.
The Lord, that's right. I love the pronunciation. The Lord. Okay? God, the uncreated light of God. I mean, look at the description of the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. What lights the New Jerusalem? It's not the sun. S-U-N. Okay. Might be the other. So, from their abodes, the children of light descend. They rejoice in the midst of the world where they had been persecuted. What is he talking about in stanzas 6 and 7? Who are these children of light who are flying in chariots of clouds?
The apostles, the saints.
The martyrs. The dead in Christ. It's all those who have achieved paradise. So he's describing those who are in paradise. All right? And what do they experience? They experience beauty, they experience joy, they experience wonder, all those kinds of things. Okay? Notice they can walk on the water like Peter did. Temporarily, Peter did. Okay? A bunch of descriptions of what's going on there. And then you get stanza 8. Because what happens? With stanza 8, we get introduced to this. I'm going to use my left hand because I think I tore my right shoulder yesterday. So you have the mountain like this, okay? And there are people walking around, picnicking, flying on clouds, And then there is, we're told, a gulf. So that down here you have the rich man, and over here you have Lazarus. Okay? The parable of the rich man and Lazarus that Christ told. And what does he tell us? Because the sight of paradise is far removed and the eye's range cannot attain to it, I've described it over simply, making bold a little. Resembling that halo which surrounds the moon, we should look upon paradise as being circular too. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead to this is 2 later stanzas. In fact, let's just go up to there. Stanza 12, sorry, not stanza 8. The children of light dwell on the heights of paradise, okay, and beyond the abyss they espy the rich man. So they're up here, and they see the rich man down here. And he too raises his eyes, and he sees Lazarus. And he calls out to Abraham to have pity on him. Because Abraham, being a friend of God, and walked with God, and ate with Abraham's probably a little bit higher up here than Lazarus is. Okay? So what happens? Notice in that parable of the rich man and Lazarus, what does Abraham say to the rich man? No. He goes, okay, well, if you won't send Lazarus to send me a drop of water, send Lazarus back to the earth to tell my brothers. What does Abraham say? They won't believe him. They have the law and the prophets. If they won't believe that, if they won't believe Moses, and they won't believe the prophets, they're not going to believe even if somebody comes back from the dead. Now, some people would probably read that and say, Abraham's being kind of harsh there. I mean, here he is down there, he's suffering, he's thirsty, he's hot. Give him a drink of water. Well, look at what St. Ephrem says. And this isn't unique to Ephrem. This is, one of the points I think Brock was trying to make. This is a basic Semitic concept kind of in early Christian literature. But Abraham, that man so full of pity, who even had pity on Sodom. What's he talking about? Sodom. God says, I'm going to go destroy Sodom. Well, what if there are 50 righteous men? Okay, then I won't. 45, 40, 35, 30, 25, 10, 15? 15? Okay, Abram, if there are 15, I won't destroy Sodom. And I think he 5. It's either 5 or 10. I think it's 5 or 10. And that's probably because Abraham's thinking, okay, there's Lot, there's Lot's wife, there's his daughters, there are their husbands, and he's probably getting up to that magic number 10. Okay? The abyss severs love, which might act as a mediator, thus preventing the love of the just from being bound to the wicked. Well, what does it mean, bound?
Feel it. It's just not there at all.
Exactly. They're not conditioned by it. They're not controlled by it. How often are we controlled by those we love? We do something because they want us to, and we feel bad if we don't. That's what he's talking about there. Okay? He doesn't, or Ephrem is saying, Abraham doesn't feel any compunction on their part. Even though, think about that passage in Genesis again. Even though he sat there and kind of debated with God. Come on, you going to kill everybody? What if there's... Okay? Now, keep in mind, what are we told? When we do see the image of Sodom. It's not a pretty image. I mean, it's pretty rough. It would make San Francisco look like, a holy city, let's say. I'm from the Bay Area, I can say that. So he goes on, preventing the love of the just from being bound to the wicked, so that the good should not be tortured by the sight in Gehenna of their children or family. Or even a mother who had denied Christ, employing mercy from her, or her maid, or her daughter. And it's kind of interesting because Brock gives us your footnote there. What's Ephrem? Because he says, perhaps a personal note? Is this Ephrem talking about his mother? Okay.
It's interesting talking about a mother because there's actually a scene in The Great Divorce. A mother who is on the fringes of paradise there, and she wants to go see her son. Why won't they take her to her son? Talk to him,
And in The Great Divorce, why can't she?
Because
what would paradise do to her? You remember what the blades of grass are like?
they basically
They're
stab
like
her.
swords because it's so real.
Yeah.
It's so sharp. And everything outside paradise is a shadow. And so if it's real and sharp and you step on it and you are not as real, you're not going to bend that blade of grass. That blade of grass is going to pierce through you. And so it would be great pain. Okay? And that's Lewis tying into that you'll also see in other fathers of the early fathers of the church, that heaven and hell are the exact same place. It's being in the presence.
Is the person.
Exactly. It's being in the presence of God. And you go back to, well, what does that mean? It means God is everywhere. All places, all times, etc. You can never, Job saying, though he slay me, yet I will see him. My soul can go down to Sheol, and yet you are there, etc. It is all dependent upon what is your attitude towards God. If it is you deny God, the shoulder, then that becomes great pain because you deny the thing that's tapping you. It's like, go away. I don't want to acknowledge you, kind of a thing. Love, and then it's the greatest joy in the world. Lewis really goes into that quite a bit. So, all of these that are in paradise had been implored. They are all who had suffered affliction for the sake of Christ. That's, Christ, the Beatitudes. Blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you, what? For my sake. It's not that they're going to persecute you and then realize, oops, we made a mistake. He means, no, you're going to be persecuted because of who you are, which will be false. Okay? That is, the persecution will be false. You should not have been persecuted, is the point there. All right? So the persecuted will laugh at their persecutors. That doesn't mean Abraham is going to laugh at the rich man. The rich man didn't persecute Abraham. The rich man persecuted Lazarus. How? Helping him in this life. So what this means is that all of those, let's say, martyrs who were murdered in the Colosseum will, St. Ephrem says, be laughing at the gladiators who killed them, or the Caesars who were responsible for their death. It's kind of like a divine poetic justice, The afflicted at those who had caused them affliction, the slain at those who had put them to death, the prophets at those who had stoned them, the apostles at those who had crucified them, the children of light in their lofty abode, as they gaze on the wicked and count their evil actions. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, this is hard to swallow. But it's kind of like, because they're sitting there in paradise looking down at all those suffering and kind of going, now you get what you got coming. Because we suffer rarely on earth, you get this for all eternity. No. Like their joy in paradise is caused by the other. I don't know that that's what Ephrem is suggesting, but for my warped, twisted Western mind, that's how I read it. And then he has this stanza 16. And he says, what I have told must suffice my boldness. That is, I think he seems to be saying there, kind of being bold in describing what I've described. Why? Because it's a supposition. It's not that it's necessarily true. But if there is anyone who dares to go on and say, now, what is the person going on and saying? Look at the part in quotation marks. As for the dull-witted and simple people who've done wrong out of ignorance, once they have been punished and paid their debt, he who is good allows them to dwell in some remote corner of paradise where they can graze on that comes ... Why the ... Why is it left unfinished? The main clause is what's left out. What is implied, however, would be in the main clause. Go back to the beginning. As for, if there is anyone who dares to go on and say, as for, okay, all of that is a dependent, the as for and to the ... He seems to be saying, now there will be some who will, well, and after their sins get purged, God will allow them to come down over here and live over here in, I don't know, swampy land of paradise. It's still paradise, okay? But it's not up here. You know, they don't get the nice condo with the penthouse, as it were. Okay? They get the little one-story shack, etc. And then he doesn't finish it. But what is he starting to imply? Is he starting to imply they are suggesting this would be the case? Or that they are wrong? It's not clear. Now, as for those who dare, he says, suggest. Notice he doesn't finish it. Why not? Exactly. I think it's because this is St. Ephrem's way of saying, we don't know. We don't know only who makes it and who doesn't.
It's kind of like Lewis again from Mere Christianity.
Everything's like
Where he says, where he kind of just has a little brief interlude where they say, well, what about all the people who haven't heard about
never received the gospel.
Heard about Christianity, and he simply says, well, Scripture is silent on that. We don't know what provisions God has made for those people, and that's and that's that, and we just leave it at that. We don't know what happens.
We don't know, and and he also says, and we don't judge.
Right.
Period. People are not to judge. Period. But other Christians go on and look at something like Romans, where Romans talks about people having the law of God written on their hearts, and those who haven't heard the quote unquote gospel aren't judged according to whether or not they know the gospel.
Right.
So some far off tribe in Papua New Guinea that has never heard about Christianity, some guy dies there, okay, doesn't automatically go to hell unless you're how do I put this? Well, unless you are a strict follower of St. Augustine.
Right.
Okay, this part of St. Augustine's whole idea of original sin was everybody is born with it, and unless you're baptized and purged of it through baptism, everybody goes to hell, babies included. So a baby who dies 2 minutes after childbirth, if that baby is not baptized, that baby goes to hell. Now, the Catholic Church has since modified that a little bit.
They go to,
It's essentially like limbo.
Yeah.
It's a not so bad place of hell. You know,
It's the swampy area.
that's essentially kind of it. Okay, but Calvin never backtracked from that. I mean, he never backtracked that if you are not, redeemed through God's grace, you're damned. Which is why Calvin thought, in terms of John Calvin, in terms of the entire history of the human race, the number that will be in heaven is almost infinitesimally small compared to whatever the billions are that have lived. It won't be, in other words, a billion out of, the total number who have ever lived. Let's say that number is 30 billion. It wouldn't be a billion. It'd be in the millions or hundreds of thousands. I mean, a small number, okay? All right, let's go on to number 2, hymn 2. And he talks about here, look at just the last sentence of the brief little intro. Those who prove worthy of paradise will be given an abode appropriate to the character of their life on earth. So, you lived well on earth, well not meaning powerfully and with money and goods, but you lived a virtuous life on earth, the higher up, there you are. Okay? I don't even want to talk about the first stanza, but look at the response. Blessed is he who is pierced, and so removed the sword from the entry to paradise. Okay. He was pierced with the sword, thus doing what? Rephrase what he says. Reopening the way to paradise. Okay. Well, what blocks, after the fall, what blocks the entry to paradise? The cherub with a flaming sword. Okay. And so a sword gets used to reopen the way to paradise. Well, what's the reopening? The water and blood pouring out of Christ's side. Images of baptism in the Eucharist again. Okay.
Now, this whole thing that he's talking about here, this is a post resurrection, renewed earth kind of thing, or is it heaven? Because he was talking, because there's this stuff about soul sleep later on, which would suggest that he doesn't see you going straight to this paradise when you die.
Right.
This is something that happens after
Right.
Judgment Day.
Right. His view
and him equating it with the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Suggests that it's a physical.
His view of paradise, it's kind of twofold. It's paradise at creation and post. I'll use a big word. And post eschatological. Okay, that is after the apocalypse, the end of the age. So he views paradise kind of in these two lenses, let's say, which really turn out to be one lens.
Right, because
it's exactly the same.
Because the entire point of the atonement and all, and the entire history of God's covenant with man is to get back to
paradise
before the fall.
And it's not just to get back to paradise, it is to continue what began at paradise.
Right.
It's to continue the image and likeness that I had up there. It's as if everything that happened from the eating of the tree of knowledge was an interlude between the real feast and the ending of the feast. Kind of an idea. So it's this idea of, let's say here's the tree, and it's eating the tree, and coming down here, what are you doing?
Backtracking.
You're wandering.
Yeah, you're
And the idea is to get all the way back. In other words, it's an image that you see repeated throughout Scripture. What happens when the Jews leave Egypt? They wander. They don't go straight to Jerusalem. They do go from Egypt to Jordan, and then they have to go back because they're not trusting God. And God says, okay, 40 years, sends it back off into...
There's a river there.
And there's all kinds of very similar imagery. There's a river, there's a mountain.
Yeah.
Okay. Moses goes up on the mountain. What does he see on the mountain? at the top. And then notice it's not, and Ephraim's going to use all. Moses goes up to the top of the mountain, and what does he experience up here? God. Okay? But Moses is the only one who goes up all the way up there. Others come down the mountain. Okay? The elders. The rest of the people are all down here on the bottom of the mountain. Okay? And this is where they're screwing around with golden calves and all that kind of stuff. Right?
Now, is Ephraim's idea of paradise like a mobile idea of paradise? Like, because it was Dante's idea, and it's from what I understand, it's fairly static. Like, you whatever you did in life, you're sort of stuck there.
No, I think Ephraim's idea is there is movement. That is, those who arrive here don't necessarily there for all eternity. Okay, why? Because of that idea of
because you're starting that
yeah.
moving closer to God.
Because of that idea of theosis, what are they doing? They're continually going higher and higher, further in,
Right.
getting more and more and more and more godlike. What Peter calls, being transformed from glory to glory. So that's why he says, after that response, make here on earth and take the key to paradise that will open the door to you. Well, how do you do that? Virtuous living. Virtuous living. Okay? Skip 2, unless you have something earlier you want to talk about. Stanza 5. He says, the righteous too perceive that their own affliction no longer exists. Their suffering does not endure, their burden no longer remains, and it seems as if no anguish had ever assailed them. Their fasts appear as though a mere dream. Okay? For they have woken, as it were, from sleep to discover paradise. Notice that's as it were. Okay? To discover paradise and the kingdom's table spread out before them. Well, what about? He's talking about all the things that you endure in this life will appear as what when you wake up into real life. Lewis's Shadowlands to the real Narnia. Okay? Everything here will appear as small. Everything that one endured will appear as trite. Okay? When he says, their fasts appear as though a mere. Okay, he's talking about at the time when Ephrem is writing, the quote unquote fasts of the church had already established. Okay, which there are in the Orthodox Church today. There are 4 major fast periods, 2 long ones, Advent and Lent. They're both, Advent begins on November 15th and ends on Christmas. Lent begins whenever Lent begins in the Orthodox Church, but ends on Easter. Lent is always a 50-day period. Okay, you have 6 weeks of preparation week, which doesn't count as Lent per se, and then you have Pascha. So that's 7 weeks, essentially, of fasting from animal products. So what he's talking about here is those long fasts, okay, and that's what he's probably getting at is an even more, because from what we know of the early Christians, especially those who lived in the deserts, some of their fasts were pretty extreme, okay? And he says, and it will seem like what? As a dream. Why? Because of the feast that was before them. Okay? So how do you understand that word feast? What do you think of? Thanksgiving?
Well,
a Christmas feast?
we would think of that, but back then feasts were sort of like, would be separate.
I think of people who are starving and then just finally get like this giant feast before them, kind of.
Yeah. Okay. But it is helpful to think Middle Eastern culture, like a Middle Eastern wedding, even if you've only seen it on a film or something. Okay, where it's not just your and your in-laws family, but your cousins, their cousins, 8 times removed, so that you have this huge gathering, and food literally spilling off the table. Just food galore. Okay, that's the image. That's the image. They discover the kingdom's table out before them. What is this? This is what Paul and Jesus before him will call the wedding feast of the Lamb. And he uses, Christ uses that wedding feast language intentionally. What's the first miracle he performs? Turning water into wine. At what? A wedding. Oh, it's a feast. It's a wedding feast. Okay, so if you just take that image for a moment, this one wedding. Okay, now this is in the small town of Capernaum outside Nazareth. This isn't like New York or Washington, D.C. This wouldn't even be like Woodbury. Okay, think of a town a fourth the size of Woodbury.
I don't even know what Woodbury is. So.
It's out east of town. Or think of a town 1/10 the size of Murfreesboro. Just some little kind of hole in the wall. Well, what do we know actually of that feast at the wedding of Cana? Okay? They ran out of wine. And so Christ tells the guy to fill up the pitchers full of wine. Now, what do we mean by pitchers? It's not like a pitcher of beer. You go to La Siesta or something and you get a pitcher of beer. It's not that kind of pitcher. What's he talking about? He's talking about these big, like drums of water. We would think of them like a 50-gallon drum. And I think the scriptural account gives us a number, 4 or 5. Fill them up. Okay? And he turns it into wine. 4. It's 200 gallons. We're not talking, the kind of wine that you buy by the gallon, $1.99 because it's really, really bad. Okay? We're talking El Primo because what does the steward of the wedding say? You save them.
Most people bring out the bad wine at the end of the feast and everybody's drunk and doesn't care.
You save the best for last. Okay. So this is like, $50 a bottle of wine. And there's 200 gallons of it. Why would he make so much?
Because there's a lot of people.
Exactly. Okay. And it's a small town. So now extrapolate from that to this. Okay. This is a big feast. This is good wine. All right.
This again?
The bottom of stanza 5. The kingdom's table spread out before them. But by those who are outside, the summit cannot be scaled. Those who are outside. But from inside paradise, it inclines, I love that passage, it inclines its whole self to all who ascend it. If you've ever been backpacking, or if you've ever, I'm starting to run again. I used to run marathons, and I'd have to do hill training every now and then. So I'd go and find a nice, steep, about a good 10% grade for a mile. Just kills you, all right? What he's talking about here is backpacking, and you have to go up a pretty steep incline. It gets tiring really fast. But the language he used, as you're climbing and you're leaning forward, what does the mountain do? It inclines before you, meaning it kind of like falls down, going uphill, but it's like you're walking on a level ground. That'd make running the country music marathon a breeze, believe me. Just running the country music like this, okay? It's not like the Murfreesboro half marathon. Okay, go on to, unless you have other passages. Let's see. Stanza 10. Talking about paradise. When he, that is God, made this intricate design, he varied its beauties, so that some levels were far more glorious than others. To the degree that one level is higher than another, so too is its glory the more sublime. That is, the higher you go, the more glorious and the more sublime it becomes. In this way, he allots the foothills to the most lowly, Okay? The slopes to those in between, and the heights to the exalted. Now, what does that mean? It means those who, let's say, experience God here on earth, they get the heights. But those, if you're like me and you just slop your way around in life, maybe you get the foothills. I would slop me down there. Maybe you get the foothills. But those who are more exalted, they're up here. Okay? So, not necessarily those who, not the Mother Teresas are those who are here. The Mother Teresas, the St. Francis of Assisi, those guys are up here. Okay? Yeah, the apostles are going to be.
Is the all of the apostles.
Yeah, the apostles are definitely going to be up there. Okay, they had a pretty good. David, Abraham,
even Peter.
Even Peter with his denials and such. Go on to let's see here. Now look at number 11. I don't have it underlined or anything, but when the just ascend its various levels to receive their inheritance, with justice he raises up each one to the degree that accords with his labors. That is, with how hard he worked in this life. Each is stopped at the level whereof he is worthy, there being sufficient levels in paradise for everyone. And one of the things, he'll kind of discuss later on is, golly, how's everybody going to fit? We'll talk about that later. The lowest parts for the repentant, the middle for the righteous, the heights for those victorious, while the summit is reserved. Sorry, I shouldn't have put, even the others up there. The summit is reserved for God's presence. Nobody else can kind of occupy that spot, but God. Noah made the animals, and he gives us an example.
You already mentioned that the
people rise. Yeah, exactly.
The mountain doesn't really end. It
right.
Just keeps going.
And so he then gives us a visual example from another passage of the Bible. Noah made the animals live in the lowest part of the ark. In the middle part, he lodged the birds, while he and his family lived on the upper part. So what do we see? We see the repentant, we see the exalted, and we see the righteous. Okay. On Mount Sinai, again, same thing. The people below, the priests round about it, and Aaron halfway up, and Moses on its heights, while God alone was on the summit. So,
I have one question.
Sure.
How would a person sing this? It was talking about how he had other people sing these things.
Yeah, he wrote these for use in church.
These aren't exactly,
well, you got
out my vision.
You got to understand. I mean, Eastern hymnology is the tonal structure is entirely different than Western music.
Right.
So to get an idea of the sound, listen to do a Google search and listen to an imam singing the call for prayer.
Right.
Okay. Or do a Google search and search for something like Arab Christian chanting, and you'll get an idea of what it would sound like. And one of the things I love the most when my family, when we're in London every other summer, is we go to this Antiochian Orthodox church. It used to be an Anglican church back in 1750. It's a beautiful building. And most of the members there are Arab. And one of the guys, a deacon who does a lot of the chanting, just goes up and he actually chants from what used to be the Anglican pulpit, big stone thing that you walk up into.
I'm sorry, what was this now? What is it now?
Used to be an Anglican. Now it's an Antiochian Orthodox Christian church. He goes up there and sings, and it's like you're transported to Jerusalem. The guy just has I know absolutely no Arabic whatsoever, but he just has this amazing voice, and so that's probably how it would work. In the Orthodox Church, there are a lot of hymns that are multiple stanzas like this that go on and on, called canons.
Well,
okay?
yeah, it wasn't so much as that, but they mentioned there's no rhyming structure
right.
in the original Syrian or Syriac, and so and considering how complex and prosaic this kind of all is to a certain extent, I was sort of wondering what, I don't know. I guess I'm having a hard time imagining how somebody would actually sing. This.
Do I have on here? I was looking at the flyer I did for this class the other day, and I was realizing how different the course I finally structured is from the flyer.
I didn't see flyers.
And one of the things I had on the flyer was, and you can Google this and find it, listen to it because it'll give you a real idea. Canon of St. Andrew of Crete. Okay? Or YouTube it would be even better. And you'll hear the Canon of St. Andrew of Crete is this long service in the Orthodox Church, and it's all sung. Okay, sung by chanters, the priests, a few parts to do, not much. But it's all sung. You can find it in English, you'll find it in Greek, you'll find it in Arabic, etc. And it's cool if it's done well. If you get a small little mission church and people can't sing, it's horrible. Okay, try and find it by a Greek, a Greek church, or look for this, Agni Partheni, by, find this one in particular. I know it's on YouTube. The monks of Simono Petra. It's a monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. It's all in Greek, so you won't understand the Greek, but you'll understand the music, the sound of their voices. It'll just take you out of the world. I mean, it is so amazing. But it'll give you an idea of how material would have been sung. And from the introduction, much of what Ephrem wrote was written for women choirs. Most of this will be men's choirs. Very few churches have women. I wanted to go to stanza 13. He talks about the symbols of the divisions, and he kind of explains why. He depicted for us the types of paradise with all its arrangements. Notice, Moses depicted for us the types of paradise. That is, the kinds of things that will be seen. That is, what Moses depicted are images. The images themselves aren't the reality, however. The images point to the reality that lies behind them. All right? Harmonious, fair, and desirable in all things. Its height, its beauty, its fragrance, its different species. Here is the harbor of all riches, whereby the church is depicted. So now what has he just done? He's just equated paradise with the church. So it's not just creation post-eschatological. It's the church universal, the church overall, okay, which has all kinds of levels, all kinds of areas. Why? Well, how else is the church depicted, say, in the New Testament? The body of Christ. It has a head, it has feet, it has toes, it has fingernails, it's got little hairs on fingers. So, whereas some people might be the brains, some people might be the hairs or, age spots and, things like that. Okay?
Wow. Wait, what did you say?
I'm not even going to go to what I would be. Okay, hymn 3. He starts to say, okay, since this is what people are kind of interested in. Summit. As for that part of the garden, my beloved, which is situated so gloriously at the summit of that height, where dwells the glory, not even symbol can be depicted in man's thought. That is, we can't even come up with a symbol that we can comprehend. For what mind has the sensitivity to gaze upon it, or the faculties to explore it? In other words, it's beyond. Okay? This is apophaticism. It is totally separate and beyond our comprehension. Or that garden whose riches are beyond comprehension. Because notice, paradise is an apple of the garden. or let me rephrase that. The garden isn't all of paradise. Okay? There's paradise, and the garden is in. Okay? So he talks about the tree of life. And then he says, stanza, skip over about the tree of life. Stanza 3. In the very midst he planted the tree of knowledge, endowing it with awe, hedging it in with dread. I love that. You know, like you have the tree, and around the tree is a big hedge. Okay? Dread, as it were, you know, not posted, no trespassers, just all the way
It's
around.
A hedge of dread.
It's the hedge of dread. Okay?
Hedge makes fear dread.
Endowing it with awe, hedging it in with dread, so that it might straightway serve the inner region of paradise. Okay? So 2 things did Adam hear in that single decree. What's that single decree? Don't eat of this tree, for in the day that you do, you shall surely die. That they should not eat of it, and that by shrinking from it, they should be lawful to penetrate further beyond that tree. So his implication is that, let's say the tree of life is, the tree of knowledge is here. It's not only, you can't eat of this, but you may not go beyond that. Why? For this reason. It is only when they obey that commandment, then the doorway will be opened. It's only by obedience that then one can go further.
Okay, so there is a kind of hedge there, because when he said that the tree of knowledge blocked off the way to the tree of life, I'm kind of like, so is it like a lot of trees?
I think he's kind of, no, I don't think it's a literal sense. I think it's metaphorical.
Yeah.
And what he means by all ways up here, all ways come through that tree.
Right.
Okay? Which is why also, what does that tree then become? Okay. Well, later, I'm going to take back what I said. Does something different than what Dante does. St. Ephrem says that the tree of life, which is up here, the tree of life gets buried and then gets dug up and is used as the cross. Okay? Dante does it a little bit differently. Dante says the cross is made from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So it's kind of, Paul says, just as in one man all men died, so as in one tree all men are made alive. Just as in one all men died, so in one tree, the cross, all are made alive. And if I remember correctly, there's another story that some of the gopher wood used to make the ark was made from the tree. The wood from the ark was used to make the cross. That's a separate story. It's not Dante or Ephrem.
The concept of original sin, as a lot of people describe today, was something that Augustine sort of developed as opposed to. Now, what concept of the fall of man is Ephrem working from here? In terms of I guess a more literal.
Well, this way, and we'll get into this a little bit more with a couple of other later writers. Ephrem in Middle East do not hold that guilt is passed down genetically. That's essentially what Augustine taught. Everyone inherits the guilt of Adam. Okay? What the writers of the East says is that what everyone inherits is the propensity for sin. Not that they've actually individually done sin. In other words, a one-day-old baby that dies hasn't sinned.
Right.
Has the propensity to sin. If the child goes on, will probably grow up to be a dirty, rotten SOB.
Well, definitely grow up to be a dirty
Okay.
SOB because all of them sin.
Yeah, but that
not
according I understand.
sense.
I
mean,
understand.
like
Yeah, in the Calvinistic kind
in
of.
an actual sense.
Yeah.
You know?
So they don't accept this idea that everyone is born totally depraved. The writers in the Middle East will say everyone is born with that propensity to sin, but everyone is also still born bearing the image of God and destined to, and I use that word destined very loosely, and can choose to, let's say, become more in the image of God. Okay, the whole thing about theosis is not necessarily something that's for after death. Writers of the East say, no, this can happen on earth. This can happen while you are still alive. And where you see it is where you read Lives of the Saints, who have these mystical visions, mystical experiences. Mother Teresa. Have I talked about, Mother Teresa's little train ride to Calcutta? Mother Teresa, I think it was 1947. She is a somewhat young nun. She's on a train ride, and she has a vision of Christ. Not a dream, not a hallucination. She has a vision of Christ. And Christ tells her, go to Calcutta. Take care of the outcasts, the poor, the downtrodden, the untouchables, the people nobody else will take care of, my Lord. She goes, she gets her bishop's blessing because she tells, or her priest's blessing, she tells him what happened. Are you Jesus? Away. Okay. So she has this experience. For 50 years, she serves the people of Calcutta and then she dies. On the same day as Diana, Princess of Wales. Okay? Diana gets this great, huge outcry pouring over, and Mother Teresa had very, very little what happened. Well, a few years after she dies, her former priest decides to write letters that she had written to him over the previous 50 years. Okay? Letters which she did not want published. And what comes out in those is that she had this one experience. And then for 50 years, she felt like her prayers to God were not heard. She felt like there was nothing but a closed door. She never had any kind of experience after that. And she really, I don't want to say suffered depression, because she never despaired. But she felt like nobody was listening to her. And yet, she went on. Okay? Went on. Many of the writers of the Eastern Church would say she attained it. Why? Like Lewis says in Mere Christianity, she was down there in one of those valleys. What did she do? She kept on working. And it's in those valleys that he writes about, and that Screwtape talks about. In those valleys that God says, way to go. Even when I kind of turn my back and make you think I don't exist, you still believe. Act it out. That's the job to do. Okay? 4 minutes. So hymn 3, tree of knowledge being planted there, and how Adam couldn't go beyond the tree of knowledge. And then go to stanza 5. When the one, and that's Satan, learned how the glory of that inner tabernacle, as if in a sanctuary, was hidden from them, higher up on the mountain, and that the tree of knowledge, clothed with an injunction, served as the veil for the sanctuary. So now he's giving us another image. What's the image of? He's taking paradise now. Here is a mountain, and he's translating it to another image. An image that his hearers would be very well aware of, even though they may not have physically ever visited there. They wouldn't have been able to because it was gone for a few hundred years by this point. He's talking about the temple. Okay, the temple that has its outer area. Got the temple like this. It's got an outer area. It's got a smaller inner area. It's got an even smaller inner area, and then it's got the Holy of Holies right here. Okay? So he says, and that the tree of knowledge, clothed with an injunction, served as the veil for the sanctuary. He realized it's a key of justice that would open the eyes of the bold and cause them great remorse. He knew if I can get to take a bite of this, their eyes will be open and they'll suffer. Okay? And their eyes were open, though at the same time they were still closed, so as not to see the glory of their own low estate, so as not to see the glory of that inner vehicle, nor to see the nakedness of their own bodies. These two kinds of knowledge God hid in the tree. So what could they not see? They couldn't see the glory of this, and they couldn't see the glory of their nakedness. It was glory. What do they see as a result of eating the tree? Shame. Shame at what? That they're... No. Shame at having lost the glory. That's what Ephrem wants to point out. Okay? So he says, but when Adam boldly ran and ate of its fruit, this double knowledge straightway flew toward him, and it removed the veils from his eyes. What did he see? He saw the glory of the Holy of Holies, God, up here, okay? And he sees in two senses. I think it's, he can see it visually with his eyes, but what else does he see as a result? Oops. I can't now go there, okay? And he beheld to his own shame and blushed, groaning and lamenting because the twofold knowledge he had gained. Did he gain knowledge? Yes. Was it a good knowledge? No. It had proved for him a torment. In other words, when he saw God up here and he saw his nakedness, the removal of his glory, he realized he missed. He realized at that point what his goal really was. He went in the exact opposite direction. He didn't experience theosis. He experienced, for lack of a better term, humanosis. He became more, or better than that, atomosis. He became more earth-like, less divine. Okay?
Like the animals in the last battle, losing their...
Like the dwarves in the last battle. Okay, we'll stop there. Like I said, we will definitely